The hospital was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that makes every sound echo through the long white hallways. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and the scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the air. It was just another shift for the night nurse, a woman who had worked in the emergency room for over 10 years. She'd seen everything: broken bones, car crashes, even the occasional heart attack. But nothing ever truly prepares you for what you don't expect. She was finishing some paperwork at the nurse's station when she heard the soft sound of the automatic doors sliding open. At first, she didn't look up. People came in and out all the time, and the security guard usually greeted them first. But then she heard something, a sound that didn't belong. A small, shaky sob. When she lifted her eyes, she froze. A little girl stood at the entrance. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her hair was messy, tangled into knots, and her cheeks were streaked with tears and dirt. She was barefoot, her small feet covered in dust and tiny scratches. In her arms, she held a worn-out teddy bear, one of its button eyes missing and the other hanging by a thread. The nurse blinked in confusion. There were no adults behind the child. No one else was coming through the door. "Sweetheart?" the nurse said softly, standing up. "Are you okay?" The little girl didn't answer. She just stood there, trembling, her lower lip quivering as another tear slid down her cheek. The nurse slowly walked toward her, speaking in a calm, gentle voice. "It's okay, honey. You're safe here. My name's Linda. Can you tell me what happened?" The girl sniffled but didn't speak. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Her little fingers clutched the teddy bear so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her breathing was uneven, small gasps breaking between sobs. Linda knelt down so she was eye level with the child. "You're okay now, sweetheart. You're at the hospital. We'll help you. Where are your parents?" The question seemed to make the girl flinch. Her small shoulders tensed and she looked down at the floor. A few moments passed before she whispered something, but her voice was so quiet that Linda couldn't hear it. "What was that, sweetie?" Linda asked gently. The girl tried again, this time a little louder, but her voice cracked halfway through the words. "Mommy, gone." Linda froze for a second, unsure if she'd heard that right. The words were so small, but the meaning behind them felt heavy. She didn't ask anything else immediately. She just held out her hand and said softly, "Come on, honey. Let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" The girl hesitated, looking at the nurse's hand. Then slowly she took it. Her hand was cold, her skin rough from being outside. As Linda guided her toward one of the smaller examination rooms, she noticed the faint dirt marks on the girl's legs and the bruises around her wrists. Not fresh, but noticeable. The nurse didn't want to scare her by asking too many questions yet. First, she needed to make sure the child was physically okay. She called out to a colleague to bring a blanket and a cup of warm water. The other staff members glanced at the girl with a mix of concern and confusion. It wasn't every day a child walked into the ER alone. When they reached the room, Linda helped her onto the bed. The little girl sat quietly, staring down at the teddy bear in her lap. She looked so small sitting there, feet dangling above the floor, not saying a word. Linda spoke softly. "Can I see if you're hurt anywhere, sweetheart?" The girl gave a small nod. Linda checked her arms, her knees, her head. No major injuries, just scrapes and bruises. It looked more like she had been walking outside for a while rather than hurt by someone. "Did you walk here all by yourself?" Linda asked, keeping her tone calm and warm. The little girl didn't answer. She just kept whispering to her teddy bear, as if talking to it gave her comfort. Linda sat beside her and tried again, this time even softer. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Lila." "That's a beautiful name," Linda said with a smile. "Hi, Lila, I'm glad you came here tonight. You were very brave." Lila didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. That was enough for now. A few minutes later, the doctor came in. He gave Linda a quick questioning look, and she quietly filled him in on what little she knew. They both agreed to keep things gentle, no pressure, no sudden questions. Sometimes kids needed time to trust. Linda offered Lila the warm water, and the girl took small sips, holding the cup with both hands. Her eyes looked tired, far too tired for a child her age. "Lila," Linda began softly, "can you tell me where your mommy is?" The girl's eyes filled with tears again. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mommy, not wake up." Linda felt a chill run through her body. The words hit like a punch to the chest. She exchanged a look with the doctor, who nodded silently. "Okay, sweetheart," Linda said carefully. "You did the right thing coming here. We're going to help your mommy, okay? But I need you to help me a little too. Can you tell me where she is?" The little girl shook her head and began to cry harder. Between sobs, she said, "House, by the water." Linda gently rubbed her back, whispering soft reassurances while she reached for the phone on the counter. She didn't want to leave the girl's side, but she knew what she had to do. She dialed the hospital's front desk and asked them to contact local authorities immediately. A child had come in alone, saying her mother was unresponsive. They needed to treat this like an emergency. While waiting for help, Linda stayed with Lila, giving her a small snack bar and a blanket. The girl slowly began to calm down, holding the teddy bear close to her chest. Linda smiled gently. "That's a nice bear you have. What's his name?" Lila wiped her nose and whispered, "Mr. Buttons." "Mr. Buttons, huh? He looks like he's been on quite an adventure with you." That made Lila smile a tiny bit for the first time. "He keeps me safe." Linda's heart ached at those words. She wanted to hug the girl, to tell her everything would be okay, but she knew she had to keep things professional while staying compassionate. The hours dragged on slowly. Linda continued to keep the girl company, coloring on a piece of paper she brought from the nurse's station. When asked if she could draw where she lived, Lila began sketching with the crayons. Her drawing showed a small house next to what looked like a river or lake, surrounded by trees. There was also something that looked like a small bridge nearby. Linda recognized the area vaguely. It was on the edge of town, near the old county road where few people lived. When the police finally arrived, Linda met them outside the room and quietly explained everything. She emphasized how scared the little girl was and asked them to go slowly with her. 2 officers entered, kneeling down to Lila's level. They spoke softly, just like Linda had. When they asked where her mother was, Lila pointed to her drawing. That was enough for them to start searching. While they left, Linda stayed behind with Lila, promising she wouldn't go anywhere. The nurse could tell the girl felt safer knowing she wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't until later that night that Linda allowed herself to take a deep breath. She didn't know what the police would find, but something inside her told her that this little girl had gone through something no child should ever experience. The image of her, barefoot, clutching that old teddy bear, tears running down her dirty cheeks, stayed burned in Linda's mind. She'd seen many patients walk through those doors, but never someone so small, so quiet, and yet so strong. And though she didn't know it yet, that moment, the sound of those doors sliding open, would change everything that night. The emergency room felt colder that night, even though the heaters hummed softly in the background. The little girl sat on the hospital bed, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The nurse stayed by her side, afraid to leave her even for a moment. Something about the way the child had whispered those 2 words, "Mommy gone," kept echoing in her head. She had already made the call. The police were on their way, but every minute felt like an hour. The nurse knew time mattered. If the child's mother was hurt or unconscious somewhere, she could still be alive. But all they had to go on were a few quiet words and a child's crayon drawing of a little house near the water. The nurse sat in the chair beside the bed and tried to keep her voice calm. "Lila, honey, you did something very brave tonight. You came all the way here by yourself. That was very smart of you." The girl didn't say much. She just kept stroking the soft fur on her teddy bear, as if that helped her stay grounded. After a few moments, the nurse tried again. "Can you tell me how far your house is from here? Was it close or did you walk a long way?" Lila frowned, thinking. "It was dark," she whispered. "I just walked. You walked all by yourself?" The girl nodded and her voice trembled when she said, "I didn't want Mommy to be cold." The nurse's heart sank. She smiled gently, not wanting the child to see the worry in her eyes. "You did the right thing coming here. The people outside are going to help your mommy, okay? They're going to find her." Lila looked up, her eyes full of hope. "They'll help her wake up?" "Yes," the nurse said softly. "They'll do everything they can." A few minutes later, 2 police officers entered the ER. They spoke quietly to the staff at the front desk before walking toward the room. One was a tall man with kind eyes, and the other a woman who looked gentle but serious. They both crouched down when they saw Lila. "Hi there," the woman said softly. "My name's Officer Kelly. This is my partner, Officer Reed." We're here to help you and your mom, okay? Lila gripped her teddy bear tighter and gave a small nod. Officer Kelly noticed the drawing on the bed. Is this your house, sweetheart? Lila nodded again. That's me and Mommy, she said, pointing at two stick figures beside the little square house. And that's Mr. Buttons. She held up the bear proudly for a moment. The officer smiled warmly. That's a great drawing. Can you tell me if there's a big tree near your house or a road with a sign? There's water, Lila said. And a bridge. Mommy says don't go near it, that was all they needed. The officers looked at each other, understanding exactly where to go. It was near the old river road, a quiet stretch on the edge of town where only a few small houses stood. Before leaving, Officer Kelly turned to the nurse. We'll call as soon as we find anything. Please keep her safe here. You have my word, the nurse replied. Once the officers left, the room felt even quieter. The nurse tried to distract Lila with crayons and paper, but the little girl kept glancing toward the door, waiting for someone to come back with news. Do you think Mommy will be mad at me? She asked suddenly. Why would she be mad, sweetheart? Because I left, Lila said, her voice breaking. She said stay close. But she wasn't waking up. I tried shaking her, but she didn't open her eyes. The nurse's chest tightened. Lila, you did the right thing.
You didn't do anything wrong, okay?
You were very brave. You helped your mommy by coming here. The girl nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed sad. She curled up under the blanket, still holding her bear close. As the hours went by, the nurse checked on her between other patients. Every time she peeked into the room, she saw the same thing. Lila sitting quietly, waiting. There was something about her calmness that felt both heartbreaking and strong. Children had a way of holding hope in the smallest spaces, even when the world around them fell apart. Then, sometime after midnight, the phone at the nurse's station rang. The nurse picked it up, her heart pounding. It was Officer Kelly. We found the house, the officer said. There was a gas leak. The mother's alive but unconscious. We're bringing her in right now. The nurse let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Is she going to be okay? She's breathing. The paramedics got there in time. We'll know more once the doctors check her. When the call ended, the nurse couldn't help but smile. She turned toward the small exam room and walked quickly inside. Lila, she said softly. Honey, they found your mommy. She's on her way here right now. The little girl's eyes widened. She's okay? She's going to be okay, the nurse said, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. The doctors are going to help her wake up. For the first time since she arrived, Lila smiled, a real smile, the kind that lights up her whole face. She held her teddy bear up as if to show him too. Mr. Buttons, Mommy's coming. The nurse laughed softly, feeling tears prick her eyes. Yes, she is. A short while later, the sound of the ambulance siren grew louder outside the ER. The paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. The woman on it looked pale, her hair tangled, an oxygen mask covering her face. She was alive but weak. Lila tried to run toward her, but the nurse gently held her back. Wait, sweetheart. Let the doctors help her first, okay? The girl nodded, her eyes locked on the stretcher as it disappeared behind the emergency doors. The nurse stayed with Lila, holding her hand, explaining everything that was happening in simple words. They're giving her medicine to help her breathe. She's safe now. You both are? Minutes felt like hours again, but finally one of the doctors came out and gave a small nod. She's stable, he said. You can let the little one see her, but only for a few minutes. The nurse bent down beside Lila. You ready to see your mommy? The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly. The nurse led her into the room where her mother lay resting. The machines beeped quietly, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Lila climbed carefully onto the chair beside the bed and reached for her mother's hand. Mommy, she whispered, her voice trembling. I came to get help. I brought Mr. Buttons, too. The woman didn't wake, but her fingers twitched slightly in response. It was enough. Lila smiled through her tears, whispering softly, I love you. Mommy? The nurse turned away for a moment, pretending to check the monitors, but really she was blinking back tears. When she looked again, Lila had placed her teddy bear beside her mother's arm, tucking it under the blanket as if to keep her company. She doesn't like the dark, the girl said quietly. That's very kind of you, the nurse replied. You have such a big heart, Lila. The next few hours passed quietly. The mother was moved to a recovery room and social workers arrived to check on Lila. The officers returned, explaining that the gas leak had likely started earlier in the day. It had filled the house slowly, making the woman pass out before she even realized what was happening. If the child hadn't walked for help, she might not have made it. The nurse couldn't stop thinking about that. About how a 6-year-old girl had somehow found the courage to leave her home in the dark, barefoot just to save her mother. Later that morning, when the sun began to rise and soft light filled the hospital halls, the nurse went to check on Lila one last time before her shift ended. The girl was curled up in the chair beside her mother's bed, sleeping soundly with her head resting against the blanket. Her tiny hand was still holding onto her mother's. The nurse smiled softly. She pulled the blanket up to cover the girl's shoulders and whispered, "You did it, sweetheart. You really did." As she walked out of the room, she knew this was one story she would never forget, not because it was dramatic or strange, but because it reminded her of something simple yet powerful. That love, even in the smallest person, could move mountains. And that night, a little girl's courage had saved a life. Morning light spilled through the hospital windows, painting the walls with soft gold. The storm that had rattled the town the night before was gone, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The nurse walked slowly through the hallways, coffee in hand, thinking about the little girl who had walked into the ER hours earlier. She couldn't shake the image from her mind. That small figure standing barefoot in the doorway, tears streaking her face, clutching her old teddy bear like it was the only safe thing left in the world. When she reached the recovery room, she peeked through the door. The little girl was sitting in the same chair as before, her legs swinging slightly, her eyes fixed on the woman in the bed. Her mother still hadn't woken up fully, but the doctors said she was breathing better. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the room like a calm heartbeat. The nurse smiled softly. "Good morning, Lila." The girl turned around and smiled a little, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Hi, did you sleep at all?" "A little bit," Lila said. Mommy moved her hand. "I think she's getting better." The nurse nodded. "She is. You did something very special, you know that? You helped her." Lila looked down at her teddy bear. "Mr. Buttons helped too," the nurse chuckled. "Then you both did." There was something about the way Lila spoke, simple, honest, pure. It reminded the nurse why she had chosen this job in the first place. Helping people wasn't always about medicine or machines. Sometimes it was about listening, comforting, and just being there when someone needed it most. A few minutes later, Officer Kelly returned to the hospital. Her face looked tired, but she smiled when she saw the little girl. "Hey, there's my brave explorer," she said warmly. "I brought you something." From her jacket pocket, she pulled out a small brown paper bag and handed it to Lila. Inside were a few crayons, some stickers, and a small juice box. Lila's face lit up. "Thank you. You earned it," the officer said. She turned to the nurse, her tone softening. "Mind if we talk outside for a moment?" The nurse nodded and stepped into the hallway with her. "The gas leak was real," Officer Kelly explained quietly. "We had the fire department check it out. It looks like one of the pipes behind the old stove had been leaking for hours. The mom must have passed out before she realized what was happening." The nurse frowned. "Any signs of anyone else being there?" The officer shook her head. "No, it was just the two of them. The door was unlocked and there was a half-eaten dinner on the table. My guess is the mom was cooking when it happened." The nurse looked through the small window at Lila, who was happily putting stickers on her bear's worn paw. "That little girl walked all the way here alone in the dark." "I know," Officer Kelly said. "She's tougher than most adults I've met. And she probably saved her mother's life." The two women stood in silence for a moment, both watching the girl through the glass. Then the nurse asked softly, "What happens now?" "Well," the officer said, "social services will talk to the mom once she wakes up. They'll make sure the house is safe before either of them go back. For now, the little one stays here. I'll file my report and check back later." When the officer left, the nurse went back inside. Lila was sitting cross-legged on the chair, drawing again. This time she was sketching something new. A picture of a hospital room with two stick figures holding hands. "Who's that?" the nurse asked, pointing. "That's Mommy," Lila said proudly. "And that's me. And that's you." "Me?" The nurse laughed. "I look very tall in that picture." "You're tall," Lila said seriously. "And nice." The nurse felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, sweetheart. A few hours later, the doctor came in to check on the patient. The woman's color was better, and her breathing was steady. When he gently touched her shoulder, her eyelids fluttered. "Ma'am," he said softly, "can you hear me?" There was a pause, then a faint nod. The nurse leaned forward, her heart racing. "She's waking up," she whispered. The woman's eyes slowly opened. They were hazy at first, struggling to focus. Where am I?" she murmured weakly. "You're in the hospital," the doctor explained. "You had a gas leak at home, but you're safe now. You're very lucky." The woman blinked, trying to understand. "Lila?" she asked in a shaky voice. Before anyone could answer, the little girl's head snapped up. "Mommy!" she cried, running to the bedside. The nurse tried to stop her, but the doctor nodded, letting her go. Lila grabbed her mother's hand, tears spilling down her face. "You woke up." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed her daughter's small fingers. "You came for help, didn't you?" Lila nodded quickly. "I walked to the hospital. Mr. Buttons helped me." The mother laughed softly through her tears. "You saved me, baby." The nurse felt her own eyes sting. She stepped back quietly, giving them space. Moments like this reminded her how fragile life could be. How a few minutes, a few choices, could change everything. Later that afternoon, after the doctor finished checking on them, the nurse brought in some food for both of them. The mother was still weak but able to sit up. She looked at the nurse with tired eyes full of gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. "I don't remember much. Just feeling dizzy. And then nothing." "You don't need to thank me," the nurse replied gently. "Your daughter did all the work. She's the reason you're still here." The woman looked at her little girl, who was nibbling on a cracker and humming to herself. "She's my whole world," she whispered. "She's also a hero," the nurse said with a smile. Over the next day, the hospital became a second home for them. Lila drew pictures for the staff, made friends with a volunteer who brought her juice boxes, and even helped fold tiny hospital towels with the nurses. Everyone knew her name now, the brave little girl who walked to the ER in the middle of the night. When the mother was strong enough, social workers came to talk with her. They were kind, patient, and understanding. They told her about safety checks for the house and ways to prevent gas leaks in the future. The woman listened carefully, promising she'd never let something like that happen again. That evening, as the sun set behind the hospital windows, painting the sky in orange and pink, the nurse came by one last time to check on them. The little girl was sitting beside her mother, her head resting on her arm. The teddy bear was tucked between them, wearing one of the stickers from earlier. "You two look cozy," the nurse said with a smile. The mother smiled weakly. "She won't let go of me." "I wouldn't either if I were her," the nurse said softly. "You both went through something scary. It's okay to hold on a little tighter." The woman looked at her for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did she even get here? It's so far from where we live." The nurse shook her head, still amazed. "She walked, all the way down the road, across the bridge, and through the parking lot. She must have followed the lights. I think love guided her more than anything." The mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I can't believe she did that." "She's stronger than she knows," the nurse said, "and so are you." Before she left the room, the nurse turned back and saw the two of them cuddled up together, whispering softly. She didn't want to interrupt. Some moments were too pure to disturb. Outside the window, night fell quietly. The hospital lights glowed like stars against the dark sky. Life went on. Patients came and went, phones rang, and doctors hurried between rooms. But in that one small room, everything felt still. The nurse stood there for a while, just watching, before heading back to her station. She knew there would be more emergencies, more sleepless nights, more people needing help. But she also knew she'd carry this one story with her forever. The story of a little girl who didn't give up, and a mother who got a second chance because of her child's courage. As she walked away, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they walk barefoot. and in the quiet of that hospital night, those words felt completely true. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly into the recovery room. The air was quiet except for the gentle rhythm of the machines and the occasional chirp from the birds outside the window. The nurse walked in carrying a tray with breakfast, oatmeal, toast, and a small cup of juice. The mother was awake, sitting up slowly, and the little girl was perched at the edge of the bed, her small hand wrapped tightly around her mother's fingers. "You two look better today," the nurse said with a warm smile. "How are we feeling this morning?" The woman smiled weakly. "Still a little dizzy, but much better than yesterday. I can finally breathe without feeling like the room's spinning." "That's good to hear," the nurse said, setting the tray down. "You've both been through a lot. The doctors say you'll be fine after a few more days of rest." The little girl looked up. "Can Mommy come home today?" "Not just yet, sweetheart," the nurse replied gently. "We want to make sure she's strong enough first, and the people from the safety office are still checking your house to make sure it's safe." The girl nodded, looking disappointed but understanding. She leaned her head against her mother's arm, hugging her tightly. The nurse smiled, then quietly stepped back to give them a little space. It wasn't long before Officer Kelly arrived again, carrying a small folder and a cup of coffee. She greeted the nurse and then turned to the mother with a kind but serious expression. "Good morning," she said softly. "I wanted to give you an update about your house and what we found." The woman looked nervous. "Is everything okay?" Officer Kelly nodded. "The fire department confirmed it was a gas leak from an old pipe behind your stove. It looks like the connection had been wearing down for a long time. The good news is it wasn't caused by anything you did wrong. The bad news is the whole line needs to be replaced before you can go back." The woman let out a shaky breath. "That explains the smell I kept noticing. I thought it was just the stove acting up again." "It was leaking slowly," the officer explained. "Sometimes you can't even smell it until it's too late. But you and your daughter were very lucky. If she hadn't come for help when she did, the leak could have turned deadly." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She turned to her daughter and brushed her hair gently. "I don't even have words," she said. "She saved my life." "She sure did," Officer Kelly said with a small smile. "You've got a brave little girl there." The nurse nodded. "We all saw it. She walked in here barefoot, shaking, but she didn't stop. She knew she had to get help." Lila's cheeks turned pink. She looked down shyly and whispered, "I was scared." "That's what makes you brave," Officer Kelly said softly. "Doing something even when you're scared." The girl smiled a little at that, hugging her teddy bear closer. After a while, the officer excused herself to finish some paperwork, leaving behind her card and a promise to check in again soon. The nurse stayed behind, quietly tidying up the room. She noticed the little girl had started drawing again. This time, it was a picture of a house with a big sun shining above it. In the window were two stick figures waving. "What's that one?" the nurse asked, smiling. "That's our new house," Lila said proudly. "It doesn't have broken things." The nurse's heart ached in the best way. "That's a beautiful house," she said softly. Later that day, the nurse sat in the staff lounge, thinking about everything that had happened. It wasn't every day a story like this came through the ER. The whole hospital was still talking about the barefoot girl who walked in to save her mother. A few people had even started collecting donations to help fix their home. Word spread quickly in small towns, and kindness always followed. By the next morning, the community had already stepped in. The hospital's social worker came by with some news. "You won't believe it," she said, grinning. "Local volunteers are helping repair their house. A plumber offered to replace the gas lines for free, and a hardware store donated materials." The nurse's eyes widened. "That's incredible." "People wanted to do something," the social worker said. "Stories like this remind folks that we still take care of each other." When the nurse went to tell the mother, she could hardly believe it herself. "You're getting help," she said with a smile. "The community's fixing your home." The woman looked stunned. I don't even know these people." "You don't have to," the nurse said softly. "Sometimes kindness comes from strangers." Tears filled the woman's eyes again. "All because of her." she whispered, looking at her daughter. She saved me and now people are helping us. It feels like a dream. A few days passed and slowly things started to feel normal again. The woman regained her strength, walking around the room with a little more confidence each day. The doctors were pleased with her recovery. Lila filled her days with coloring, exploring the hospital corridors and talking to anyone who would listen about her teddy bear's adventures. She had become a small celebrity in the hospital. Nurses waved at her as she passed, and even the cafeteria staff saved her favorite juice boxes for her. It was hard not to smile when she was around. Her laughter seemed to chase away the usual heaviness that came with hospital work. One afternoon, the nurse found her sitting in the waiting area, staring out the big glass windows. Outside, the sky was bright and clear. "Hey, what are you thinking about?" the nurse asked, sitting beside her. "Going home," Lila said softly. "Do you think it'll smell funny again?" The nurse shook her head. "No, sweetheart. The nice people are fixing it. When you go back, it'll be safe and clean. And maybe you can open the windows and let the sunshine in." Lila smiled at that idea. "Mommy likes sunshine. She says it makes the house happy." "I think she's right," the nurse said. "Houses need love just like people do." They sat there quietly for a few minutes, watching the cars outside. Then Lila asked, "Do you have a little girl?" The question caught the nurse off guard, but she smiled gently. "No, I don't. But I take care of a lot of people. Kind of like how a mommy takes care of her family." Lila thought for a moment. "You'd be a good mommy." The nurse laughed softly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me today." The following week, the day finally came when the doctor said it was time for them to go home. The nurse helped the mother pack a small bag with the few belongings they had brought to the hospital. Lila skipped around the room, excited to leave but still holding tight to her teddy bear. Before they left, Officer Kelly came by one last time. "We checked your house," she said. "The repairs are done and it's completely safe now." The plumber replaced everything and even put in a new detector. The mother's eyes filled with gratitude again. "Please tell everyone thank you." "They already know," the officer said with a kind smile. "They're just happy you both made it out okay." As they walked toward the hospital doors, the nurse felt a strange mix of happiness and sadness. She had grown attached to them, especially to that brave little girl with the big heart. She knelt down and hugged her goodbye. "You take care of your mommy, okay?" Lila nodded seriously. "I will. And I'll come visit you one day." "I'll hold you to that," the nurse said, smiling. The mother hugged the nurse too, her eyes wet with tears. "Thank you for everything. You were there when we needed someone the most." "It was my honor," the nurse said softly. "You both remind me what this job is really about." They stepped outside into the bright morning air. The sun was warm and a light breeze brushed through the trees. A volunteer car was waiting to take them home. Lila turned back one last time, waving from the sidewalk. The nurse waved too, watching as they drove away down the long road leading out of town. When she finally went back inside, the nurse felt lighter. The ER was already buzzing again with new patients and new emergencies, but in her heart, she carried that one story. The story of the barefoot girl who walked through the dark to bring back the light. That night, after her shift ended, she drove home and sat quietly in her living room. The town was peaceful, the stars shining softly above. She thought about the little girl's courage, the mother's tears, and the kindness of all those strangers who had helped rebuild their home. In a world that often felt full of noise and rush, it was moments like these that reminded her what truly mattered: love, bravery, and people who cared enough to help others without expecting anything in return. She closed her eyes and smiled, whispering softly to herself. Sometimes heroes come in small packages, and she knew deep down that she would never forget that small pair of bare feet that had carried hope all the way to her door. 2 weeks later, the little house on the corner looked completely different. The broken window was replaced, the front steps had been painted, and the smell of gas that once hung in the air was gone. Instead, there was the faint scent of fresh paint and clean air drifting through the open windows. The woman stood on the porch, her hand resting lightly on the railing. The sunlight touched her face, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly safe. Beside her, the little girl twirled around with her teddy bear in one hand, her laughter echoing down the quiet street. "Careful," her mother called out gently, smiling. "You'll make yourself dizzy." "I like dizzy," the girl giggled. "It feels like the wind is hugging me." The mother laughed softly. It felt good to laugh again. There had been so many days when laughter felt impossible, but now it filled the air as easily as the breeze that swept through the trees. Just then, a car pulled up by the sidewalk. Out stepped the nurse and Officer Kelly, both smiling as they waved. The little girl squealed with delight and ran to greet them. "You came," she shouted happily, wrapping her arms around the nurse's legs. "Of course we did," the nurse said, bending down to hug her back. "We had to see your new home." The mother came down the steps, her smile warm. "It means so much that you're here." Officer Kelly nodded. "We wouldn't miss it. The whole town's been talking about you two. Everyone wanted to help make sure your home was safe again." The woman looked down, humbled. "I don't even know how to thank everyone. We never expected this much kindness." "That's what communities are for," Officer Kelly said softly. "People help each other. That's how we all get through the hard stuff." The little girl tugged at the nurse's hand and said, "Come see my room." The nurse laughed. "I'd love to." Inside, the small house was cozy and bright. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and the curtains fluttered lightly in the window. In the little girl's room, a new bed stood by the wall, neatly made with colorful sheets covered in stars. On the nightstand was a drawing, the same one she had made in the hospital of a house with two people waving from the window. "You put your picture up," the nurse said, smiling. "It's our good luck picture," the girl said proudly. "It means our house is happy now." The nurse's eyes softened. "It really is." As they looked around, the mother joined them. "It's simple, but it's home," she said. "I don't care that it's small. Every corner of it feels like a blessing now." They all sat down in the living room for tea. The little girl poured juice for everyone, trying hard not to spill. The sunlight streamed in, dancing across the floor. The nurse noticed the mother's hands didn't shake anymore. Her color was back, her voice steady. Healing had come, not just to her body, but to her spirit too. After a few moments of quiet, Officer Kelly cleared her throat. "Actually," she said with a grin, "we didn't just come to visit. There's something else we wanted to show you." The little girl's eyes widened. "A surprise?" "Sort of," Kelly said, handing the mother an envelope. "It's from the town council." The mother looked puzzled but opened it carefully. Inside was a printed letter and a small card. Her eyes moved slowly across the words. When she finished reading, tears filled her eyes again. "What is it, Mommy?" the little girl asked. The woman smiled, brushing her cheek. "They're inviting us to a town event next weekend. They want to give you an award." "Me?" the girl said, her voice full of disbelief. The officer nodded. "For bravery. They want to thank you for what you did. You saved your mom's life and inspired everyone in this town." The girl looked down shyly, hugging her teddy bear close. "But I was scared." "That's what makes it special," the nurse said softly. "You were scared, but you didn't stop. That's what heroes do." The little girl smiled slowly. "Can Teddy come too?" "Of course," Officer Kelly said with a laugh. "He deserves a medal too." The following weekend, the town gathered in the park near the river. It was a warm afternoon, and families filled the area with picnic blankets and laughter. A small stage was set up with a microphone, and the mayor stood beside it, holding a shiny medal that glimmered in the sunlight. When it was time, the mother and daughter walked up to the stage, hand in hand. The crowd applauded softly, and a few people even cheered. The nurse and Officer Kelly stood near the front, smiling proudly. The mayor spoke kindly, telling everyone how the little girl had walked into the emergency room all alone, how her quick thinking had saved her mother's life, and how the courage of one small child had reminded everyone of the power of love and bravery. Then he bent down, placing the medal gently around her neck. "For courage, kindness, and love," he said warmly. "You are our little town hero." The crowd erupted in applause. The little girl beamed, holding her mother's hand tightly. She waved, a little shy at first, but when she saw the nurse smiling at her, she waved bigger, grinning from ear to ear. Later, after the ceremony, people came up to congratulate them. Some brought small gifts, books, flowers, even a handmade card from the local school that said, "You're our hero." The mother thanked everyone, her heart full. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you," she said to the nurse quietly. "You already have," the nurse said. "Just seeing you both happy again is enough." The little girl came running over, holding an ice cream cone. "Mommy, they gave me 2 scoops." Her mother laughed. "You deserve it, sweetheart." That evening, as the sun began to set, they all sat by the river, watching the water glimmer in the fading light. The nurse and Officer Kelly joined them for a while, talking about everything that had happened: the gas leak, the hospital, the repairs, the award. It all felt like a story from another life now. The mother turned to the nurse and said, "Do you ever think about how small choices change everything?" The nurse nodded. "All the time. One step in the right direction can change a life." "She took that step," the mother said softly, looking at her daughter. "Barefoot and scared, but she took it," the nurse smiled. "And look where it led." The little girl sitting on the grass with her teddy bear was making flower crowns from the wild daisies nearby. She placed one on her mother's head and another on the nurse's. "Now you both look like queens," she said proudly. They laughed together, and for a long moment there was only peace: the gentle rustle of the leaves, the ripple of the water, the sound of laughter that would stay in their hearts forever. As the night deepened and the stars began to appear, the mother whispered to her daughter, "Do you remember what you told me in the hospital? That our house would be happy again?" The girl nodded sleepily. "It is happy now." The mother kissed her forehead. "And so am I." The nurse stood quietly nearby watching them. She felt something deep inside, a reminder that what she did mattered, that the world still had goodness in it even when things felt dark. She smiled softly and whispered, "Sometimes heroes wear tiny shoes." A week later, the hospital hung a small framed picture in the hallway, a photo of the little girl receiving her medal. Below it, a short message read, "In honor of courage that reminds us what hope looks like." Every time the nurse walked past it, she felt a spark of warmth in her chest. The photo reminded her that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from ordinary people doing something brave out of love. Back at the small house on the corner, life settled into a beautiful kind of normal. The garden bloomed again, the laughter returned, and though time moved on, the memory of that one night, the night a little barefoot girl walked into the ER crying for help, would never fade. Because from that moment forward, she wasn't just the little girl who was scared. She was the little girl who showed everyone what courage truly looked like. And her story lived quietly in the hearts of everyone who heard it. A story of fear turned into strength, of strangers turned into family, and of how even the smallest person can change everything when led by love. The nurse, the officer, the mother, and the little girl would cross paths many more times in the years that followed, sometimes at the grocery store, sometimes at the park, sometimes just to share a cup of tea. Each time they'd smile and remember, because once you've shared a moment like that, one that brings you to the edge and then back again, you carry it with you forever. And somewhere, under a starlit sky in a quiet house that now smelled of safety and home, a little girl slept peacefully, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, her medal hanging proudly on the wall beside her bed. The world outside was calm, the night was still, and everything, and finally, was exactly as it should be.